I was sitting at my own kitchen table when my daughter-in-law slid a motel brochure across to me. Ellis, you'd be more comfortable staying here. The locks have been changed for security. My own son kept his head down, too ashamed to meet my eyes. The sting cut deep. After a lifetime of sacrifice, I was being erased in my own home. But what Marla didn't know is that tucked in my coat pocket was the original deed my late wife and I safeguarded years ago. So when the movers came to take me out, I stood tall and showed them the papers. Her smile vanished, and that's only the beginning, because the lies she spread after nearly cost me everything. Follow this story until the very end, and comment the city you're watching from so I know how far my story has reached. The porch had always been my sanctuary. In the early spring evenings of Asheville, the air still carried a chill, but the pink wash of dusk softened the edges of grief. Sitting there with the creak of the old rocker beneath me, the silence pressed heavy. The absence of Evelyn, my wife, echoed in every corner of that house. The lilacs she planted along the fence were just starting to bud, as if nature itself had decided to remind me of her tenderness. It should have been a peaceful evening, yet unease stirred in the stillness. From the open kitchen window, voices filtered out. Marla's voice, sharp and clipped. She thought I couldn't hear, but years of age had not dulled my ears as much as she believed. We just need to secure the assets. He's old. It won't take long. Paperwork's almost done, she said, each word soaked in calculation. The word assets cut deeper than she could imagine. They weren't assets. They were my life's work. They were the bricks I laid, the mortgage checks I wrote, the repairs Evelyn and I made with our own hands. Yet to Marla, my daughter-in-law, they were trophies waiting to be claimed. And I sat in that chair, still as stone. The rocking motion halted. There was no anger then, not yet, only the hollow sting of realization. My own home, my life, reduced to a line item in her cold conversation. Inside later, the dinner table should have been a place of family comfort. Instead, it became a stage. Marla steered the conversation like a conductor with a baton. She spoke of market conditions, investment opportunities, legal transitions. Each phrase was dressed in casual tones, yet carried the weight of decisions already made. Raymond, my son, sat there quiet, his fork moving aimlessly across his plate. He avoided my eyes, as though his silence would excuse him from complicity. Marla filled the silence with her self-assured voice, as though she were already the head of this household. You know, once the paperwork is finished, things will run much smoother. Less for you to worry about. Ellis, she said, turning her smile toward me, sweetened with the condescension of someone who believed she was smarter, stronger, more entitled. My appetite vanished, yet beneath the table, a small hand slipped into mine. Tessa, my granddaughter, her eyes steady, her grip reassuring. In that moment, she saw what no one else did. The sting, the silent humiliation. That touch reminded me I wasn't invisible, not entirely. Later that night, the house lay quiet. I sat in my study, surrounded by the scent of old leather and the tick of the mantel clock. Memories crowded the room, photographs, Evelyn's reading chair, stacks of unpaid bills tucked into drawers. As I pulled open a drawer, a folder slipped out, Evelyn's handwriting on the label, neat and careful. Savings, for Ellis. Inside were old financial documents, small but steady investments she had managed, tucked away to ensure I would never go without. A lump rose in my throat. She had thought of me even beyond her last breath, safeguarding my dignity. And then I remembered. Weeks ago, Marla had pressed me with that saccharine urgency. Let me handle the legal hassle for you, Dad. You don't need the stress. At the time, grief had dulled my judgment, and her words had seemed practical. Tonight, those words felt like barbs, meant to strip me of what Evelyn had tried to preserve. By morning, the air was brisk, the grass wet with dew. I stepped into the yard, trying to steady myself with routine, checking the garden beds, breathing in the cool air. Morning, Ellis, Curtis Van called out from across the fence. He was a good neighbor, always quick with a smile. Yet today, his tone carried hesitation. He rubbed the back of his neck before speaking. I, saw Marla the other day. She was meeting with a real estate agent right by your property line. Didn't seem like a casual chat. The words struck like a hammer. Real estate agent, property line, decisions, conversations, all without me. The dread that had been whispering now shouted. I nodded, masking the turmoil beneath a tight smile. Thanks, Curtis. My voice came out steady, but inside the ground shifted. Walking back toward the house, I moved slower, each step heavy with the weight of betrayal. The front door stood ajar, voices carrying through the hallway. I paused just before stepping inside. Marla's voice, hushed but distinct, drifted through. It'll all be finalized next week. Your father won't stand in the way. The words froze me where I stood. A chill spread through my chest, heavier than the spring air. Finalized. My home, my security, my life, all slipping away, sealed by signatures I hadn't even seen. For the first time, the silence I had clung to as dignity turned into a prison. My stillness was no longer protection. It was surrender, and in that moment, I realized I was already losing everything. The morning light crept in through the thin curtains of my bedroom, washing the walls in pale gold. For years. Sundays had begun the same way. Coffee brewing, the back door creaking as I stepped out into the yard to check the garden. It was my ritual, the quiet rhythm of an old man's life. That morning, I reached for the familiar brass keys, worn smooth from decades of use. But when I slid one into the lock at the back door, it caught. I twisted harder, frowning. The key refused to turn, confused. I tried again, even jiggled the knob the way I had done countless times before. Nothing. The metal teeth scraped uselessly. My hand stiffened around the key as the realization hit me. The lock had been changed. Before I could steady myself, Marla appeared in the hallway. She was already dressed, hair pulled into one of her neat, controlled styles, a faint smile playing at her lips. In her hand was a glossy pamphlet. She extended it toward me like a gift. A little place downtown, she said smoothly, quiet, affordable, and more suitable for you. Ellis, you might find it restful. The pamphlet slipped between my fingers. It was for a budget motel, the kind of place that smelled of stale cigarettes and loneliness. My chest tightened. You changed the locks, I said, my voice gravelly, the words tasting like dust. Marla's smile didn't falter. For security, we can't be too careful these days. The humiliation spread through me like a fire under the skin. After decades in this house, I now stood like a guest unwelcome at his own door. Breakfast was tense. Raymond sat at the table, shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on his plate. Marla poured herself coffee with deliberate calm, each clink of the spoon against the cup sharp as a hammer strike. I cleared my throat. The locks don't work anymore. Raymond's fork froze halfway to his mouth, but he didn't look at me. Marla answered instead. Yes, as I said. Security reasons. Nothing for you to worry about. Security from whom? The question came out softer than I intended. She shrugged, sipping her coffee. Times are changing. Ellis, we just have to adapt. Across the table, Tessa shifted in her chair, her young eyes darting between us. She reached under the table, her small hand finding mine. The warmth of her touch steadied me, but Raymond's silence crushed something inside me. He wouldn't meet my gaze, wouldn't lift his head. His quiet was worse than Marla's cruelty. It was betrayal dressed in cowardice. Bitterness filled the room, thicker than the smell of burnt toast. Later, I escaped to the porch swing, the one Evelyn and I had picked out years ago. Its gentle creak had carried us through long evenings of laughter and quiet conversation. Now, it was just me and Tessa. She slid onto the swing beside me, knees pulled to her chest. "Grandpa," she whispered, "I heard Mom and Dad last night. They said something about papers, about next week being the last step." Her words lodged in my chest like a stone. I forced a smile. smoothing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Don't you worry, Tess. Grown-ups talk about all sorts of things. Everything will be fine." But inside, fear gnawed at me. Papers, finalizing, words sharp as blades. They were building a world without me in it. Still, her presence was a balm. That little girl's faith was all I had left to anchor me. If I couldn't fight for myself, I would fight for the memories she deserved to carry of her grandfather. Memories of a man who didn't simply vanish. By afternoon, the house pressed down on me like a weight. I wandered back into my study, seeking refuge among the shelves and the smell of old books. But something was wrong. Cardboard boxes sat along the wall, some already half filled with my belongings. Framed photos, weathered files, the kind of keepsakes no one had the right to touch. My heart thudded. Marla's handwriting scrawled across the boxes. Storage, hands trembling, I rifled through one of the piles. That's when I found it, an envelope folded into the pages of Evelyn's old journal. My breath caught as I recognized her handwriting, faded ink, delicate but steady. "Ellis, be careful. They are eager for control. Protect what's yours. Don't let silence become your undoing." The words blurred as tears welled in my eyes. Evelyn had seen this day coming, even in death. She was warning me. I clutched the letter as though it were her hand, grief mixed with a rising determination I hadn't felt in years. I would not be shoved aside, not so easily. Outside the door, footsteps padded down the hall. Marla's voice floated low and firm, reminding Raymond to be ready for next week. The letter crinkled in my grip. Betrayal stung deep, but Evelyn's words lit a fire. If my wife had trusted me to stand guard, then stand I would. The night had been restless. The folded letter from my late wife still pressed into my palm when I woke, its words echoing louder than any dream. "Be cautious with those eager for control." The house was quiet, but not in the way of peace. Quiet like an empty church, hollow and watchful. A man could go mad if he sat in silence too long, wondering how much of his life had already been stolen without a word. By morning, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. If Marla's hand was guiding papers and signatures, I needed to find someone who could untangle truth from the web. My steps felt heavier than they used to, but determination carried them. I folded my wife's letter back into my pocket like a compass, a reminder that she had seen the storm coming, even if I had not. Downtown Asheville was just waking up when I pulled my coat tighter against the chill. Coffee shops smelled of roasted beans, and shopkeepers raised their blinds one by one. Yet my destination wasn't one of light or leisure. It was Harold Brenner's office, a small second-floor suite with a brass plaque almost too tarnished to read. Harold and I went back decades. He'd been the sort of man who offered advice without expecting payment. The sort who showed up at my wife's funeral without waiting to be asked. Inside, the office hadn't changed much. Shelves sagged under the weight of law books with cracked spines. A dusty family photo sat near the window. His wife, their 2 grown boys, frozen in time before life carried them away. Harold rose stiffly from his chair but greeted me with the same warmth he always had. "Ellis," he said, his voice steady as oak. "I had a feeling you might show up sooner or later." I sat across from him, unsure of how to start. The words stumbled out. "I think they're trying to take the house." He leaned back, eyes narrowing. Then, without a word, he reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder, thick and marked with years of dust. My stomach tightened. "Your wife was meticulous," Harold said softly. "She made sure I kept a copy of everything. Wills, deeds, savings. She wanted to protect you." He opened the folder, sliding across a document with my name written bold across the header. It was the true will. Every line, every clause, had been written to safeguard me. I was the rightful holder of everything my wife and I built. My hands trembled as I read, because I already knew what Harold was about to say. "There's another set of documents," he explained, voice lowering. "Filed only a few weeks ago. They look official, but I suspect forgery. Someone's trying to rewrite the story. Ellis, someone who wants you out of the way." Shock flared hot through my chest, but with it came grim validation. I hadn't been imagining the tightening noose. Marla had placed it there herself. I told Harold about the night weeks ago when she slid papers in front of me after dinner. She'd smiled too brightly, said they were routine updates that needed my signature. I hadn't read them closely, trusting the woman who called me Dad with a laugh that now felt hollow. My heart sank at the memory, but Harold's expression stayed calm. "We'll need to move carefully," he said, tapping the desk with 2 fingers. "If you confront her now, she'll cover her tracks. Silence is your shield, until we've got proof even a judge can't ignore." Silence. The word tasted bitter. For months I'd been silent, through humiliation, through exclusion, through every cut of disrespect. Now Harold asked me to keep swallowing it a while longer. Yet in that silence, there was power too. If I could hold my tongue, I could strike when it mattered most. As I left his office, the folder pressed against my chest. The streets of Asheville suddenly felt different. The bells from the church tower didn't ring, they tolled. I walked faster, aware of every shadow stretching long across the pavement. That's when I saw it. Marla's car, parked half a block down, shiny and smug, just like the woman herself. My pulse quickened. Had she followed me, or was it chance? I ducked into a narrow alley between 2 buildings, the scent of damp brick and garbage wrapping around me, clutching the folder tighter. I waited until the street cleared. Every instinct screamed that she knew, that she could smell the truth on me now. My wife had warned me. Harold had armed me, but Marla was circling closer. For the first time since this began, fear and fury burned together in my chest. They thought I was finished, but they hadn't seen me fight yet. The dining room was glowing with warm light when I walked in, but I felt like a shadow among the people already seated. My coat was heavy against my chest, the folder Brenner had given me tucked deep in its lining. I told myself again and again, silence was my armor. This night wasn't about speaking, it was about watching. The long oak table had once been the heart of our family, a place of laughter and late-night coffee with Evelyn, my late wife. Now, the laughter at that table felt hollow, borrowed. Relatives I hadn't seen in months smiled politely, their words floating like dust in the air. And at the head of the table, Marla shone like she owned the house, her bracelets catching the light, her voice slicing through every conversation. She poured wine, corrected serving sizes, and guided the rhythm of the evening as though it all belonged to her. I slid into my chair, aware that no one looked my way for more than a passing nod. Even Raymond avoided my eyes, letting his wife's energy fill every corner. The smell of roast chicken and buttered rolls rose from the table, but my appetite had long since vanished. Marla rose halfway through the meal, glass in hand. "To family?" she said brightly, her eyes sweeping across the table, landing on everyone but me. To those who continue building our future, to the ones who put their hands to work and keep this family thriving. The room responded with clinks of glass and polite applause. I sat still, my fork resting on the plate, my throat dry. Future. Building. Those words had always meant legacy to me, meant Evelyn and I working 2 jobs, paying off this house brick by brick. But tonight, they were being redefined without me. Raymond lowered his gaze when I tried to catch it. He raised his glass like the others, but never once looked in my direction. My own son, my own blood. I pressed my hand into my lap, forcing myself not to tremble. Brenner's words echoed, "Your silence is your strongest weapon." I clung to them like a lifeline. Dessert came, and with it, another wound. I spoke gently, recalling Evelyn's love for peach cobbler, how she had baked it every Easter Sunday even when her hands shook with age. It was a memory meant to bring her into the room again, to remind us all of what bound us. But before I could finish, Marla cut across my voice with a laugh. Yes, traditions are lovely, but let's talk about what really matters now, new opportunities. Change is good for everyone." The room shifted toward her instantly, as if my words had never been spoken. Raymond sat beside her, silent as stone, his fork scraping across his plate. Tessa's small hand twitched toward mine under the table, but she pulled back quickly, eyes wet with frustration she couldn't voice. The pit in my stomach tightened. Grief and rage merged into something sharper. I swallowed it down. This was not the moment. This was their theater, their show. My silence was not surrender. It was strategy. By the time the plates were cleared, the house rang with laughter that had no place for me. Coats rustled, goodbyes were exchanged, and I found myself on the porch, the cold air pressing against my face. The railing beneath my grip felt like the only steady thing in my world. I stared into the night, breath visible in the chill, and thought of Evelyn. She would have told me to stand firm, to remember the sacrifices that built this home, inside. Marla's voice still floated, bright and commanding, weaving her story of the future. But out here, in the quiet, I whispered words that were not meant for anyone else to hear. They don't know what's coming. The folder was still hidden in my coat. My silence tonight had been deliberate. Let them think I was invisible. Let them believe I was broken. They would never see the strike until it landed. The house felt strangely hollow that Friday afternoon, as if the walls themselves were bracing for what was about to happen. Walking into the living room, I froze. Cardboard boxes were stacked neatly against the wall, each marked in bold black marker. Books, linens, personal items. My life had been divided into categories like old stock in a warehouse. Marla stood in the center of the room with an air of triumph, a clipboard tucked under her arm. "Just helping you downsize, Ellis," she said, her voice smooth as butter but carrying a hard edge beneath it. "Movers will be here tomorrow. It's time you had less to worry about." Raymond lingered near the corner, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, his eyes glued to the floorboards. He looked like a boy caught in the middle of a classroom scolding, powerless to defend himself, or me. Disbelief coursed through me, though it shouldn't have been a surprise after all the whispers and sidelong looks. Still, seeing my belongings boxed like clutter set out for a yard sale sent a jolt through my chest. It was my home. Every nail in these walls, every brick in the foundation had been paid for with my sweat, my savings, my sacrifices, and here I was being swept aside as though none of that mattered. Downsize? The word lodged in my throat like a thorn. This house is mine, Marla, built with my hands, my money. My wife and I raised Raymond here. She turned, her smile sharp. Not anymore. Everything's consolidated now. Paperwork's in order. It's all official. Her words carried a sting I couldn't ignore. The forged transfer papers. Brenner had warned me. This was her move, pressing her claim boldly while I stood in the living room like an unwanted guest. I felt the heat rising, every instinct urging me to shout, to throw those boxes into the fire and drag Raymond into the light to face his shame. But Brenner's warning echoed. Silence is your strongest weapon until the right time. So I bit back my words. My jaw ached from holding them in. My fists clenched so tight the skin whitened. I let the silence hang. And in it, Marla mistook restraint for defeat. Raymond shifted again, his silence louder than any defense he might have made. That cut deeper than Marla's gloating. Later, out on the porch, the evening breeze carried a cooler calm. Tessa sat beside me on the swing, her small hands folded tightly in her lap. She leaned close and whispered, "Grandpa, I saw something on Mom's desk. A new deed. It had your name crossed out." Her voice trembled, not just from fear, but from the unfair burden of knowing too much for her age. I laid a hand over hers. "You don't worry about that, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice steady. Sometimes adults make mistakes, and sometimes we have to let them think they've won for a while. Her eyes searched mine, wide with worry. I forced a smile, though inside I felt the house slipping further away, brick by brick. "I have a plan," I told her softly. She rested her head against my arm, trusting me in a way no one else in that house did. That trust anchored me. For her, I would endure. Night fell heavy and quiet. Back in my study, the boxes loomed, half filled with the fragments of a life lived here. I picked up the phone and dialed Brenner. My voice was low, steady, but edged with urgency. "She's boxing me out. Harold, she says it's all official." On the other end, his calm steadied me. Ellis, listen. A false property transfer was filed. Yes, but I have the original deed. Your deed. They can't erase that. They can pretend. They can bluff. But legally, you still hold the ground beneath your feet. The words were a lifeline. My grip tightened on the receiver, relief mixed with fear, because the storm was still coming. After we hung up, I stood by the window, looking out at the dark yard that had once been filled with my wife's laughter, my son's childhood games, the creak of the porch swing on summer nights. Tomorrow, movers would arrive, hands reaching to cart away not just furniture but my very place in this world. The glass reflected an old man's face, worn but unbroken. They want me gone by tomorrow, I whispered, my voice steady now. But I won't be erased that easily. The sound of engines rumbling in the driveway shook me awake that morning. Sunlight had barely crept over the ridge when I pulled back the curtain. 2 moving trucks stood parked like invaders, their drivers climbing out with clipboards and gloves, heading toward my front door. For a moment I thought I was dreaming, but the thud of boots on the porch told me this was no dream. I shuffled into the hallway, heart pounding, and found Marla already dressed, her expression tight and triumphant. "Good morning, Ellis," she said, her voice syrupy but laced with poison. "We're making some changes today." Her words cut sharper than any knife. The movers started lifting the first boxes stacked by the door. My boxes. Decades of memories. Photographs. Tools I'd used with my late wife, being carted away without so much as my consent. I stepped forward, steady though every bone ached with fury. "Put them down," I said, my voice low but clear. The men froze, uncertain. Raymond stood behind Marla, his arms folded, his eyes darting to the floor. Ashamed, but silent. "This is my home," I continued. "You'll not touch a thing." Marla laughed sharply. "Your home? Don't flatter yourself. Everything's been consolidated under my care now. I'm only helping you move someplace more comfortable." She gestured to the trucks as though she were doing me a favor. Betrayal burned in my chest. But I would not shout, not now. The living room filled with the sound of cardboard scraping against wood as the movers hesitated, looking from her to me. I reached inside my coat, my fingers brushing the stiff edges of the folder Brenner had given me. "Stop." My hand came down hard on the mantel, echoing through the room. I pulled out the folded deed, yellowed but intact, bearing the seal that no forgery could erase. "This," I said, holding it where everyone could see, "is the original deed to this house. My name is the only one on it." For a moment, silence hung thick. The movers shifted uneasily, glancing at each other. Marla's face darkened, her carefully painted smile cracking into a snarl. "You stubborn old relic," she spat, "clinging to scraps of paper while the world moves on without you." But I did not flinch. The humiliation of weeks past hardened into something steadier, dignity reclaimed. The men lowered the boxes back to the floor. One of them muttered, "Ma'am, maybe we ought to wait. This looks complicated." Marla's fury rose like a storm, but she was losing ground. The front door opened, and in walked Harold Brenner, his briefcase under his arm, his voice carrying authority that filled the room. "Complicated is one word for it," he said, eyeing Marla with a cold stare. "Illegal is another." He set down his case, pulling free a sheaf of papers. "Forgery of a property transfer is a felony in this state, punishable by prison time. Every mover in this room should know you participate in this. You're aiding a crime." Marla's jaw tightened. Raymond turned pale, sweat forming at his temple. He avoided his wife's gaze, but I saw the fear in his eyes. For once, he looked like a boy caught in something bigger than he could control. From the staircase. Tessa peeked through the banister, her small face filled with awe. She saw her grandfather standing tall again, not bent by silence or humiliation. That look alone gave me strength. Brenner handed me a fresh document. "Here's your protection, Ellis. They can't take what's rightfully yours." Marla's hand trembled as she reached for Raymond, but he offered nothing in return. The movers began to back away, stacking their dollies. But Marla, cornered and furious, lashed out with words sharper than claws. "You think you've won?" she screamed. "I'll ruin your name in this town, Ellis. Everyone will see you for the bitter, useless old man you are." I let her words hang for a breath, then answered, calm as the oak tree standing outside. "No, Marla, you've already ruined your own." The movers filed out silently, unwilling to be part of her madness. The truck's engines roared back to life, then faded down the road. The house grew quiet again, save for the quick, shallow breaths of the woman who had tried to erase me. She leaned close to Raymond, her lips curled in rage, her whisper carrying just enough for me to hear. "If we can't take his house, we'll take his reputation." My grip tightened on the deed in my hand. She thought she'd cornered me, but all she had done was reveal her next move. The battle for my home was over, but another war was coming, the fight for my name, my dignity, and the legacy my wife and I built together. I looked out the window at the familiar yard, the place where every tree carried a memory. They wanted me gone, forgotten, erased, but I would not bow, not now, not ever. The bell above the cafe door jingled as I stepped inside, but instead of the usual chorus of friendly greetings, there was only a hush that settled like a heavy fog. A few heads lifted, eyes sliding over me with something sharper than curiosity. Once, this place had been a second home. The owner, Pete, had always saved me a seat by the window and slipped an extra slice of pie onto my plate without asking. Now, he busied himself behind the counter, avoiding my gaze as though I'd carried some invisible contagion in with me. I eased into a corner seat, the kind where I could still see the street outside. The chatter around me shifted, not entirely hushed, but just loud enough that I could catch my own name wrapped in whispers. A couple I'd known for years leaned close together, their voices low but not low enough. "Nearly bankrupted his son," that's what I heard, one of them said. The words lodged in my chest like stones. I stirred my coffee slowly, though my hands wanted to shake. That rumor had Marla's fingerprints all over it. I could almost hear her rehearsing it, dressing it up in just enough truth to make it stick, like poison slipped into honey. Walking back out into the daylight was no easier. On the street, neighbors I'd once chatted with turned their shoulders or ducked into doorways. I walked home with every step heavier, each glance a silent verdict. The grocery store's sliding doors opened with a rush of cool air, but even there, the atmosphere clung like smoke. I moved slowly down the aisles, keeping my head low, only to hear the shuffle of hesitant footsteps behind me. Curtis. He cleared his throat, adjusting the brim of his cap like he always did when something weighed on him. "Ellis," he began, "I've been hearing things. Folks are saying, well, Marla's saying, that you forged papers, that you tried to cheat Raymond." The words stung worse than any stranger's gossip. Curtis had been my neighbor for 40 years. We'd patched each other's fences, split cords of firewood, mourned wives together. I set the basket down, met his eyes steady. "Curtis, you've known me most of your life. Do you really believe I'd do something like that?" He shifted on his feet, his jaw working as if chewing the words. "I don't want to, but people talk, and when they talk enough, it gets hard not to listen." I nodded slowly, more to myself than him. Truth doesn't bend just because someone repeats a lie loud enough. My voice stayed even, though inside a tide of hurt threatened to pull me under. Curtis sighed, gave a reluctant nod, then walked off without another word. His silence told me all I needed to know. Marla wasn't just stealing my home. She was stealing my name. That evening, the house was quiet except for the tick of the old clock. I sat at the kitchen table, hands clasped, staring at the wood grain as if it could offer answers. Tessa padded in barefoot, holding her school books against her chest. She slid into the chair beside me, eyes wide with something heavier than a child should carry. "Grandpa," she whispered, "kids at school said you're a cheat. They said, you stole from Mom and Dad." The words cracked something inside me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. No child should have to bear her family's shame, but then I saw the tears rim her eyes, and I knew I had to be stronger. For her, I laid a hand over hers, my voice soft. Sweetheart, listen to me. Lies can travel fast, but they don't last forever. Truth, it has a way of outlasting them. She pressed closer, resting her head against my arm. Her presence was the only thing keeping me from collapsing under the weight of Marla's venom. Tessa was my anchor, my reminder that not everything in this house was poisoned. It was late when Raymond came home. The door creaked, his footsteps careful on the hardwood. I looked up from my chair as he entered the dim light of the living room. His face was pale, lined with something heavier than fatigue. He sank into the armchair across from me, avoiding my gaze. "Dad," he muttered, "she's putting things together. Documents. She says she's going to show everyone at the family gathering. Proof. Proof." I almost laughed at the word, bitter as it tasted. Proof forged with the same hand that tried to strip me from my home. Raymond rubbed his temples. "I don't know what to do." His voice was barely more than a whisper. I didn't answer him right away. Instead, I rose, walked over to the drawer where I'd kept a sealed envelope for years. One Brenner had told me to guard as if it were life itself. My fingers lingered on the paper before I pulled it out and held it firm. "If she wants war," I murmured, not quite to Raymond, not quite to myself, "then she'll have it." The room settled into silence, heavy with the knowledge that the next move would decide everything. The air in the dining room was heavy, thick with the sound of silverware clinking and the low hum of relatives murmuring to one another. The house looked the same as it always had, warm lights, framed photographs along the hallway, the same oak table I had polished with my own hands years ago. But the atmosphere was different. It was no longer my home. Marla stood at the head of the table, dressed sharply, her confidence filling every corner of the room. She smiled a thin smile, then tapped her glass. "Family, thank you for coming. I want to clear up some unfortunate confusion about the estate. Ellis has been struggling. He isn't in the right state of mind to manage complicated financial matters anymore." Her voice slid across the table like oil. Every eye turned toward me. My hands rested on my lap, still. Though my chest was burning, Raymond sat beside her, his head bowed. He wouldn't even look at me. Marla pulled a folder from her purse and spread the pages out like evidence at a trial. "He nearly lost our family's wealth once before, and I can't let it happen again. I've taken steps to protect what's ours." Gasps circled the room. Some nodded in sympathy. Others looked away in embarrassment. The words stabbed deep. Unstable. Incompetent. I bit my tongue until the taste of iron filled my mouth. The silence around me was worse than her accusations. I didn't move. Not even when she shoved the papers across the table as though daring me to deny them. Brenner had warned me. Let her speak first. Let her hang herself with her own words. I lifted my eyes slowly, locking on hers, and said nothing. The doors opened behind us, and Harold Brenner's voice cut through the tension. "That won't be necessary, Marla." Heads turned. He walked in, steady as ever, carrying his own worn leather briefcase. With a practiced hand, he laid down a copy of the original will and deed. The true documents Evelyn and I had signed years ago. "These," he said firmly, "prove Ellis's legal ownership remains intact. Any transfer you've claimed is fraudulent." A ripple of shock ran around the table. Relatives leaned forward, whispers swelling. My heart thudded, not with fear this time, but with vindication. Then, from the far side of the table, Irene Fallow rose slowly, her cane tapping the floor, her eyes, still sharp despite the years, fixed on Marla. "I was there," she said clearly. "I saw you press Ellis to sign papers after Evelyn's funeral. You told him they were routine, that he needn't bother reading the fine print. I should have spoken sooner, but I couldn't watch you lie any longer." The room froze. Marla's voice cracked like glass. "This is manipulation." She slammed her hand on the table, but before she could say more, a small voice rose from the end of the table. "Grandpa isn't lying," Tessa said. Her cheeks flushed, her hands clenched tight. I saw the papers on Mom's desk. They said something about a new deed. I didn't understand it then, but I know now. The room fell into silence so sharp it rang in my ears. I turned to Tessa, meeting her eyes. I didn't dare speak, afraid my voice would break, but the gratitude in my gaze must have told her everything. She nodded slightly, as if to say, "I've got you." Every face shifted toward Marla again. Her mask cracked. Raymond rubbed his temples, his shoulders caving in. "Marla," he whispered. "Is it true? Did you—" His words trailed off, swallowed by shame. He looked at me then, for the first time in weeks, and the guilt in his eyes was almost unbearable. Marla's voice rose in a shriek. "You're all fools!" She shoved the chair back, her fury rattling the dishes. "If you think this ends here, you're wrong. I'll destroy him in court, and in this town. No one will respect him again." The room erupted into murmurs and startled gasps as she stormed out, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. I sat quietly, my hands still on the table, though my heart pounded like a drum. Around me, relatives whispered. Brenner steadied his papers, and Tessa slipped her hand into mine. The battle for my home was no longer the center. It was my name, my dignity, that she meant to strip away. The war had only shifted fields. In the silence that followed, I looked at the people left behind, the doubters, the hesitant, the ones who finally believed. My voice was steady when I whispered to myself, "Let her try." The walk into town felt different that week. The air was cool, crisp with the hint of spring, and yet something heavier seemed to have lifted, just a little. Neighbors who had once turned their faces away now gave me half nods. Hesitant, but present. A few even mumbled greetings, words they had kept back only days before. I didn't return them with anger or triumph, just a steady nod, a quiet acknowledgement. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal overnight. At the corner cafe, the murmur of voices dipped as I passed through the door. This time, though, it wasn't the icy silence that had greeted me before. A few eyes held shame, others curiosity. Curtis rose from a table near the window, his face lined with discomfort. He crossed the room slowly, and when he stood in front of me, he removed his cap and said, "Ellis, I was wrong. I listened to lies I shouldn't have. I should have known better after all these years." His voice cracked in the middle, and I could see the weight pressing down on him. I let the pause linger before answering, keeping my voice steady. "You knew me for 40 years. Curtis, you've shared my table. You've walked my land. That should have been enough." His eyes lowered, but I softened the edge. "What matters now is what you choose to believe going forward." He nodded, swallowing hard. The apology didn't erase the sting of betrayal, but it marked the first step back toward truth. As I left the cafe, whispers followed again, but this time, they carried less poison. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with Tessa. She spooned mashed potatoes onto her plate, her smile wide enough to lighten the room. "Grandpa, the kids at school stopped whispering. They said you were right all along." Her words struck deeper than any apology from the grown-ups in town. Children carry the honesty adults try to bury. I felt the corners of my mouth lift, though the weight in my chest remained. "That's good, Sita, sweetheart. Sometimes the truth takes its time getting around, but it always finds its way." She leaned her head against my arm, and for a moment the house felt warm again. Still, the shadow lingered. Marla's voice carried far, and even as some doors reopened, others stayed closed. I could feel the tension like a current still running through the town, waiting for the next spark. 2 days later, Raymond came to the house. He didn't knock, he rarely did anymore, but this time his shoulders slumped as he stepped inside. He sat across from me in the living room, eyes tired, hands clasped like a boy expecting discipline. "Dad," he began, voice low. I let her get too far. I knew she was pushing lies, but I didn't stop it. I didn't want the fights. I thought it would pass. His words rolled out heavy, carrying the guilt he could no longer keep inside. I studied him in silence, letting him wrestle with his own cowardice. At last he spoke again, voice breaking. "She's not done. Marla's hired a lawyer. She's planning to sue you for defamation." A long breath escaped me, steady as stone. "Defamation?" I said quietly. Truth doesn't fear the courtroom. My calm seemed to unnerve him more than anger would have. He shifted in his seat, rubbing the back of his neck. "Dad, it's going to get ugly," he whispered. I leaned forward, looking him in the eye. "It's already ugly, Raymond. The difference is, I stopped pretending it wasn't." That night, Harold Brenner came by, briefcase in hand. We sat at my dining table, papers spread between us. His voice carried a calm certainty as he explained. "Her case is built on lies and forged signatures. Once this reaches a judge, she won't just lose. She'll expose herself." I wanted to believe him fully, but scars teach caution. He set down one more folder, thicker than the rest, his finger tapping the corner. "You've got the truth on your side, Ellis. That's stronger than any of her noise." Just as we began to clear the table, an envelope slid under the front door. I picked it up, the seal heavy, my name written in an unfamiliar hand. Inside was a letter from Marla's attorney. The words were sharp and rehearsed, a demand that I remain silent or face ruin. I placed the letter flat on the table, my hand firm against it. My voice came low, almost a whisper, but carrying every ounce of resolve. "If they want silence," I said, "they'll get the opposite." Brenner's eyes met mine, and for the first time in weeks, I saw no pity there, only respect. I turned toward the dark window, the reflection of my own tired face staring back. Tomorrow would bring another storm, but I no longer feared it. The truth was ready to stand, and so was I. The courthouse in Columbus stood like a stern monument, its tall columns casting long shadows across the morning pavement. Walking up those steps with Brenner at my side, the air felt heavier than I'd expected. People clustered in small knots near the doors, whispering as I passed. Some gave cautious nods, others turned their faces away, and a few simply stared as though trying to weigh which version of me they believed. The man Marla had painted as a bitter fraud, or the neighbor they'd known for decades. Inside, the hum of voices echoed through the hall. My coat felt heavy, not because of the fabric, but because of the memories stitched into it. The porch nights with Evelyn, the sacrifices made for Raymond, the laughter of Tessa when she was small. All that seemed to hang on this trial, and yet, instead of trembling, I felt anchored. Whatever Marla threw at me, I knew I was standing on the truth. When the clerk called our case, Brenner gave a small nod. His confidence steadied me. Tessa sat quietly behind me, her eyes wide but resolute. That little hand wave she gave as I turned told me more than words could. I straightened my back and walked forward, determined not to let shame bow me. Marla took the stand like it was a stage. Her voice trembled in practiced places, steady in others. She spoke of me as if I were a cunning manipulator, a man clinging to a house he no longer deserved. According to her, I had endangered the family's future with reckless choices, nearly bankrupting Raymond, and now, out of spite, was trying to destroy their stability. Raymond sat a few rows behind, eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't raise his head once. Even when her voice cracked theatrically on the word father, I sat silent, watching, listening. My chest tightened, but I remembered Brenner's advice. Let her hang herself with her words. Then Brenner rose. He spoke plainly, without theatrics, as though addressing old friends. He asked permission to play a recording, and when the judge nodded, the room filled with Irene Fallow's voice. The sound of Evelyn's dearest friend came steady, unwavering. I was there. I saw Marla press Ellis into signing papers he didn't understand, telling him they were routine, telling him he'd be too old to handle affairs soon. She cornered him, and I knew it wasn't right. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Marla's face blanched, then flushed red. She stammered, trying to dismiss Irene as confused, sentimental, but the recording spoke for itself. I sat taller, not in triumph, but in a kind of release. The weight of months lifted slightly. Finally, the truth was breaking daylight. The judge leaned forward, his expression sharpened. Around me, whispers carried like a breeze through the benches. Tessa reached for my hand, squeezing with all the strength her small fingers could muster. "They finally see," she whispered, her eyes bright. Marla tried to recover, insisting that the evidence was manipulated. But then something unexpected broke the silence. Raymond stood. His voice cracked before he found it steady enough to carry. "It's true. I knew she was hiding things. I let it happen because I was afraid to fight her. I didn't want to believe what she was doing. But I saw enough to know my father's been telling the truth." The room hushed to stillness. Marla's face twisted, a mix of rage and desperation. The judge scribbled notes, gaze fixed sharply on her. For the first time in months, I wasn't the one shrinking in shame. The air itself seemed to shift. Vindication wasn't sweet, not exactly. It was sobering. This wasn't about winning a point in an argument. It was about clawing back dignity from the edge of ruin. When the gavel finally came down, declaring that Marla's accusations lacked substance and that further investigation into her conduct would follow, a murmur surged through the courthouse. Outside, reporters crowded the steps, cameras flashing like lightning. Brenner held the folder close as we pushed through, steadying my arm when the crowd pressed in. Marla shoved past them, refusing to answer questions, her face pale with humiliation. Raymond trailed after her, his shoulders slumped like a man finally realizing the cost of silence. One reporter thrust a microphone toward me. "Mr. Garrison, what do you have to say now that the court has sided with you?" I paused, the winter air sharp against my lungs. The courthouse loomed behind me, but I felt taller than its columns. "All I ever wanted," I said, voice calm and even, "was my dignity back. Money comes and goes, but a man's honor, that's what he leaves to his family." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavier than the cameras or the scribbling pens. Yet as Marla disappeared into the crowd without a word, a chill traced my spine. Silence can be more dangerous than shouting. I knew her too well to think this was the end. She wasn't finished, not by a long stretch. And so, even in victory, I braced myself. The storm had turned in my favor. But storms have a way of circling back. The house looked unchanged from the outside, but stepping inside after that long day in court felt different. The old wooden table in the kitchen seemed to welcome me back like an old friend, its surface scratched with decades of family meals, homework assignments, and quiet conversations with my late wife. Sitting there, the weight of everything settled in. Victory in court was one thing, but peace of mind was another. Her memory filled the room as if she had been waiting for me, reminding me that strength wasn't only measured by what I won, but by how I endured. The night grew quiet. Raymond's footsteps creaked down the hall until he stopped at the doorway. His face looked worn, not from age, but from guilt. He shifted uneasily, as if every word he was about to say might collapse under its own weight. Finally, he whispered, "Dad, I let her turn me against you. I should have stood up." He swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the floor. "I want to make things right." My heart ached. The son I had raised to be honest had been silent when honesty mattered most. I wanted to lash out, to tell him he'd been too late. But the years had taught me that true apologies were not in words. I leaned back, letting the silence stretch before answering. "A man's true apology isn't spoken, son. It's lived. Let me see how you live from here on." His shoulders sagged, but there was relief in his nod. Whether he could carry the weight of redemption, time would decide. Morning came heavy with storm clouds. Marla burst through the front door without knocking, her eyes sharp with fury. The trial hadn't broken her, it had only hardened her pride. She stood in the middle of the living room, spitting accusations. "You've twisted everyone against me, Raymond. Stand with me. Don't let him poison you further." Her voice was shrill, desperate, clinging to what little power she thought she still held. Before Raymond could answer, a smaller voice cut through the chaos. Tessa stepped forward, her hands clenched at her sides, Her eyes, usually filled with innocence, now carried the courage of someone far older. "No, Mom," she said, her voice steady. "I'm done with your lies. Grandpa didn't twist anyone." "You did, and I won't let you make me doubt him any more." The room fell silent. Marla's mouth opened, then closed again. For the first time, she had no script, no manipulation to lean on. The realization hit her. Even her own daughter no longer believed in her. That truth burned deeper than any courtroom defeat. With a cry of rage, she turned on her heel and stormed out, the slam of the door echoing through the house like thunder. Raymond stood frozen, his silence heavier than ever. I looked at Tessa, her small frame trembling but unbroken. Pulling her close, I whispered, "No matter what they take from us, they can never take our truth." She held on tightly, her arms wrapping around me as though she understood just how much those words meant. Outside, the storm broke, rain pelting against the windows. Marla's shadow still loomed, and I knew she wasn't finished. People like her rarely surrendered without one final strike. But in that moment, with Tessa's head against my chest and Raymond finally facing his shame, I felt something I hadn't in a long while. Hope. The battle wasn't over, but the heart of the family was no longer hers to command. Dawn crept softly across the porch as steam curled from the coffee in my hand. The quiet felt different now, not empty, not heavy, but earned. I had spent a lifetime working for this home, this family, and nearly lost both. My late wife's words lingered in my mind, reminding me that storms never last forever. But the damage they leave can change a man. The town was calmer. My name somewhat cleared. Yet a part of me knew Marla was not done. Desperation has a way of pushing people toward their own destruction. By midweek, the calm shattered. Word spread quickly that Marla had appeared in the center of town, her voice carrying across the square. I walked up slowly, hearing her rage echo off the brick walls. She screamed that I had stolen her future, that the inheritance was hers by right. People didn't rally to her side this time. Curtis stood near the bakery door, arms folded, eyes steady. When she tried to wave documents in the air, a hush fell as uniformed officers approached. They spoke quietly, but the meaning was loud enough for everyone to hear. She was under arrest for forging financial records in a last attempt to claw back the $40 million she had already squandered. Her voice cracked, then broke entirely as the cuffs clicked into place. Neighbors turned their backs. Curtis met my eyes across the street and gave me a short nod. Apology, respect, and relief all at once. I didn't need to gloat. Marla had built her own downfall brick by brick, and the collapse was complete. That night, Raymond came to the house. His shoulders slumped, his voice raw with defeat. He confessed what I already knew, that his silence had cost us all dearly. He admitted he had stood by while Marla poisoned our family, and now he wanted to make amends. I listened, not as a judge, but as a father. "A man's true apology," I told him quietly, "isn't in what he says tonight, it's in what he does tomorrow." Tears ran down his face, and for the first time in years, I believed he might try to be better. Tessa slipped her arms around me then, her young voice steady as she promised to carry forward what she had learned from watching. She saw the cost of lies and the strength in patience. Her hug carried more weight than any verdict a court could give. Later that week, we gathered again on the porch. The night air was cool, the light warm against the wood I had once sanded with my own hands. Brenner stopped by, his familiar briefcase now seeming lighter than before. "You didn't just win a case," he said, smiling faintly. "You showed this whole town what dignity looks like." I let his words sink in. They tried to strip me of everything, my house, my name, my place in this family. But money fades, respect, once restored, endures. My gaze drifted toward Tessa, sitting cross-legged by the railing, her eyes bright and trusting. That was my true inheritance, not the deed in the safe, not the savings in the bank, but the values passed on. In the end, Marla sat behind bars, her voice silenced not by me, but by the truth she had run from. Raymond remained quieter now, determined to live differently, and I, an old man who nearly lost everything, found peace again. Neighbors may forget the details of trials and scandals, but they remember character, and character, tested, battered, and proven, is what I leave behind. Greed destroys, silence enables, but dignity endures. Protecting your name and values is the greatest inheritance a man can leave to his family.